This billionaire just spent $500,000 on a seat in this submersible. That would take him 12,000 feet underwater to the Titanic. He thought it'd be the best spending of his life. Turns out it was his last. Billionaires never know what their final spending will be, but we do. So let's stack their last spendings and find out which one was worth it. Let's start with a billionaire who literally bought tickets to heaven. One for him and one for his 19-year-old son. This is Shahzada Dawood, a British Pakistani businessman, philanthropist, and probably the most obsessed person with the Titanic. Ever since the movie came out, he dreamed of seeing the real wreck in person. So in 2019, he dropped $500,000 on 2 seats in the submersible, one for himself and one for his wife for a dive 12,500 feet to bottom of ocean. But thanks to COVID, the trip got postponed to June 18th, 2023. As the day got closer, his wife realized June 18th was Father's Day. So she gave up her seat so their son could join his dad on the occasion. The son wasn't really excited about the Titanic trip, but he loved solving Rubik's Cubes and planned to set a world record by doing one at the bottom of the ocean. So on Father's Day, Shahzada, his 19-year-old son, and a Rubik's Cube began their journey to the Titanic. This is the photo they took right before boarding. Inside their sub were 2 more passengers and the CEO of OceanGate himself. Everything seemed just fine until you noticed the CEO was piloting the sub with a $30 video game controller. At around 11,000 feet, just 500 meters from the wreck, the submersible imploded. The pressure crushed it like a soda can. Turns out the company did too much cost cutting and made the sub weak for that kind of depth. The best $500,000 Father's Day, it actually saved someone's life. This next billionaire spent $300,000 on his 23rd wedding, a wedding that never happened. Meet Mohammed bin Laden, founder of the Saudi Bin Laden Group, the company behind nearly every major construction project in Saudi Arabia. By the 1960s, he was one of the richest men in the kingdom, married 22 times, father of 52 children, and somehow still lonely. He decided to marry again to wife number 23. He boarded his private plane and headed straight for Usran, where the marriage ceremony was being held. But during a tricky landing attempt, the plane went down and erupted in flames. No one survived. His final spending? 23rd marriage ceremony. He likely dropped around $300,000 back then. But here's something strange. The planes and the bin Laden family never seemed to get along. Mohammed died in a plane crash. His eldest son died in a plane crash in 1988. One of his daughters died in a plane crash in 2015. And in 2001, nearly 3,000 people died in plane crashes planned by one of his sons. Here's another billionaire whose marriage ended up costing him $300,000, plus his life. This is John Jacob Astor IV, a New York real estate billionaire and one of the richest men in America. In 1909, he ended his 18-year marriage and divorced his wife. 2 years later, in 1911, he married an 18-year-old, just 1 year younger than his own son. Today, that might not raise too many eyebrows, but back then, society was horrified. To escape the gossip, Astor and his new wife went on a long honeymoon through Egypt and Europe. During the trip, she got pregnant. Astor wanted the child to be born in the New York, so they booked their return journey on the most luxurious ship of the time, spending about $300,000 on 2 first-class tickets. The problem was, it was the unsinkable ship. When the Titanic hit the iceberg, Astor made sure his pregnant wife and her nurses got into a lifeboat. But when he asked to join them, officer refused and said, "Women and children first." Survivors say he was last seen standing on the deck, smoking a cigar, calmly watching the chaos around him. 4 months later, his wife gave birth to a son who became known in the press as the Titanic baby. Turns out his last $300,000 spending bought him the ultimate luxury, for the one last time. But this next billionaire's last spending was on something he never even got to see. This is Steve Jobs, the founder of the fruit company, with a net worth of $8 billion. In 2003, during a routine checkup, doctors found a tumor on his pancreas. Normally, pancreatic cancer is a death sentence. You don't cure that. But Steve's case was rare, a pancreatic neuroendocrine tumor, slow-growing and highly curable with immediate surgery. Doctors told him he had basically won the lottery, so he did what any other human would do. He refused it. Instead, he went all in on extreme vegan and fruitarian diets, convinced juices and vegetables could flush the cancer out. He tried acupuncture, herbal remedies, hydrotherapy, even psychics and spiritual healers, but still refused the surgery. 9 months later, when he started rapidly losing weight, scans showed the cancer had grown and spread. That's when he finally agreed to surgery. He even had a full liver transplant in 2009. He spent millions on treatments, but nothing worked. By 2011, he was gone. You might think his last spending was on fighting cancer, but you'd be so wrong. His final purchase was a $130 million super yacht, finished in 2012 after he was already dead. But unlike Steve Jobs, this next billionaire spent millions trying to protect himself from death. but still die anyway. This is Edmund Safra, a Brazilian banking billionaire. He founded Republic National Bank and the Safra National Bank of New York. Safra was always terrified. He thought the Russian mafia or international terrorists were after him. Out of fear, he built himself a fortress in Monaco. Bulletproof glass on every window, reinforced steel doors, CCTV cameras, motion sensors, and a panic room. He even hired Mossad-trained guards. And just to be safe, he kept 8 nurses and 4 doctors around him all the time. But one of those nurses, Ted Maher, felt underpaid and ignored. So he came up with a plan to bump up his salary. He thought if he staged an attack and then saved Safra from it, he'd look like a hero, and he'd finally get a bonus from the billionaire himself. So on December 3rd, 1999, he made his move. First, he stabbed himself twice in the leg and stomach. Then he lit a fire in a wastebasket to set off the alarms. He rushed to Safra to tell him the assassins were coming and pushed him into the panic room. That's where it all went wrong. The small fire spread and the thick smoke filled the apartments. Safra and one nurse were trapped inside the panic room, the same room meant to save them. Firefighters arrived quickly, but the steel doors Safra had spent millions on were too strong. From inside, Safra refused to open, convinced killers were waiting for him. But neither Safra nor the firefighters knew the truth. By the time firefighters finally broke through hours later, it was over. Safra and nurse Vivian Torrente had died from smoke inhalation. Ted Maher got 10 years in prison for arson leading to 2 deaths. His last spending was on the salaries of the very staff meant to keep him safe. This has to be the worst way to die, literally for no reason. But this next billionaire spent his last money on his wedding, which lasted 40 hours. Adolf Hitler was worth around $5 billion on paper. His fortune came from royalties of Mein Kampf, the book he wrote in 1925. He even copyrighted his own image, collecting royalties on every postage stamp sold in Germany. And beyond that, he had complete control over the Nazi economy and the nations he conquered. The resources worth trillions in today's money. By April 1945, it was all collapsing. The Nazi government was crumbling, his closest officers were switching sides, and the Red Army was closing in on his bunker. On the night of April 28th, Hitler heard on a BBC broadcast that his most loyal follower, Heinrich Himmler, had been secretly trying to negotiate surrender with the Allies. This news sent Hitler into a final rage. He knew then there was no way out. After a few hours later in early morning, he decided to marry Eva Braun, the woman who had stayed with him through it all. They held a small reception in the bunker. A few hours later, Hitler and Eva walked out of their quarters to shake hands with the remaining staff, one last time. Then they went back inside. A gunshot echoed through the bunker. When the staff opened the door, Hitler was slumped on the sofa, dead from a bullet. Eva lay beside him, dead from cyanide. On paper, his last spending was a wedding. But the truth is, what Hitler really spent wasn't measured in money. It was paid in the lives of millions. Soldiers, civilians, entire families, lost to a war he started. And in the end, Bro didn't even win.